Hey, you awesome folks! Thanks for taking this journey of discovery with your guide, Keith Haney. You're listening to the Becoming Bridge Builders podcast, your favorite podcast for everything from racial reconciliation to education innovation, justice reform, and leading change in the 21st century. This podcast is for people who love to be challenged with difficult topics, but want practical solutions to solve these challenging issues. Becoming Bridge Builders makes change possible. Each week on the podcast, Keith invites innovative thought leaders to share how they are building bridges in their area of expertise. You will hear breakthrough ideas and concepts that are changing the world. He's featuring guests who are best-selling authors, leaders at Microsoft, entrepreneurs, leading educators, professors, lawyers, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can be the bridge to the change you are seeking.
My guests today are Rick and McKinney. Rick and Jane have lived an extraordinary life of ministry. Once described as mavericks, they have stepped out into the unknown to embrace God's call and have experienced His presence in a way that only comes through a life of obedience. Whether planting or pastoring churches, traveling the world to perform concerts, building a house in Mexico, traveling from village to village in India, or walking across America, they have followed His voice, and His lead has led them forward on one step at a time. Both raised in Christian homes and surrendered their lives to God's call before they met. Jane's father was a church musician. Rick's father was a pastor. They met the second week of their freshman year at Oklahoma Baptist University, fell in love, and have been a couple for over 50 years. The commitment to God's leadership and each other has taken them on some unique and exciting journeys, the most unusual which was their walk across America. We welcome Jane and Rick to the show. Well, it's so good to have Rick on the show today. How are you doing today, Rick?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm good. It's a great day out. I can almost smell a little bit of fall in the air, so excited about that.
Yeah, me too.
So, Rick, I want to ask you a question. It's one of my favorite questions to ask my guests. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Well, I think it was a gentleman in one of the church I was pastoring once, and we were trying to decide, make a decision. It was very important. It was going to affect the rest of the history of the church, and we just didn't know what to do. And a man named David Creech sat me down. He said, "Pastor, I want to give you some advice." He said, "I've lived by this all my life, and it's always served me well." He said, "If in doubt, don't." And I have lived by that ever since. If I have a serious doubt about something, if I'm really not sure, I don't right then. I at least wait until I have a little bit clearer direction. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life by doing things that I wasn't sure were the right thing to do. Later on, it turned out that they weren't. So
there you go.
That's a great piece of advice.
Yeah, it's hard to undo a decision.
That's right.
So, Rick, I love to ask this question to my guests as well, to kind of give us a chance to kind of reflect back on our life, but also reflect back on the people who have been important in our lives. We don't always get a chance to thank them. So who are some people who have inspired you or been a mentor for you in your life that you want to just kind of take a moment to kind of thank and reflect on them?
Well, I have several. My father is with the Lord now, but he was a pastor for 55 years. He was my mentor when I first surrendered to preach, and he taught me so many things about preaching and about church. Mostly, he taught me about loving people, and I owe that great debt to him. He was one of the most loving and accepting people I've ever known. And then I had a couple of heroes who were pastors and preachers and people who were active in the ministry. One man who's in his 80s now, his name is Arthur Blessed. And in 1969, Arthur Blessed was what was called the minister of the Sunset Strip, a part of the Jesus movement. And he started a kind of a Christian nightclub on the Strip. And in 1969, God called him to walk across a 12-foot wooden cross across the nation. He began on Christmas Day, 1969, and walked all the way across the country to Washington, D.C. After that, he kept walking the cross, and he walked the cross in every country and island group in the world. He's walked further than any other human being. He's in the Guinness Book of World Records. He's walked well over 40,000 miles, and it's an amazing life and testimony. He happens to be a good friend of mine now. I got to meet him when I was a young preacher, and we've stayed close friends all this time. So he's been a big influence in my life. He actually was a big influence in encouraging us when we thought God was calling us to walk across America. And knowing that Arthur had been able to do that was just a huge blessing. So Arthur Blessed. And then lastly, Richard Hogue was my pastor for many years. And his wife just passed away a couple weeks ago. Sweet, sweet couple. He was the greatest and is the greatest preacher, orator I've ever met. I took preaching classes with him. And probably 90% of everything I know and do when it comes to preaching, I learned from Richard. So those three men have made a huge impact on my life.
Well, that's so neat. And that's what interesting stories those lives get to share with us. And we get to kind of remember and reflect on the impact that they've had on us.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So you kind of gave us a little hint of your story, but tell us about your journey. Because as I looked you up and began to prepare for this podcast, I saw your story and it was very inspiring. So I kind of want you to kind of walk us into how you got on the path that you ended up on.
All right. Well, I have been in the ministry over 50 years. I actually surrendered to the call to be in God's service when I was 14 years old. And because my dad was a pastor, I got to start preaching right away. And so I got to preach a lot of youth revivals and youth meetings and youth rallies, that sort of thing. So I pastored and preached for over 50 years now. But for 7 years, my wife and I traveled the world in full-time evangelism. We have been in all 48 lower states. We've been to China 3 times. We've been to Tibet. We've been to India, Mexico twice. And it was during those 7 years that God was just really stirring my heart about our nation and about our country. And in 2005, as we traveled, I was preaching a series of sermons called Reclaiming America. And each night was a different emphasis, reclaiming our family, reclaiming our churches, reclaiming our communities, and then finally reclaiming our nation. And I was reading one night in Joshua chapter 1, verse 3, in preparation for the next night's sermon. And God says this in his word to Joshua, every place you put the sole of your foot, you can claim for me. And I heard a voice. Now, if anybody else had been in the room, I don't know whether they would have heard the voice or not, but I heard the voice, kind of like Samuel heard the voice. And I heard a voice say, do you believe that? And I turned around to see who was in the room with me. Nobody was there. And so long story short, God and I began to have a conversation. And he said, well, what do you want to claim? And I said, our nation. He said, well, then put the sole of your foot down. I said, where? He said, how much do you want to claim? I said, all of it. He said, well, then put it down from one side to the other. And that was the impetus. It took me a couple of weeks to get the courage to tell Jane, my wife, about it. And then she wanted to know if we could ride bikes. But I told her, I said, no, I think there's a spiritual principle here. So we started to get ready. It took us a year to train. We walked 1,500 miles in 2005, bought all kinds of gear, researched shoes and walking, talked to lots of people who'd done long distance walking. And on January 1st, 2006, we left Santa Monica Pier and we started walking toward Washington, D.C. We walked 20 miles a day, 6 days a week for 6 months. And we arrived in Washington on July 4th.
Wow. It's an impressive story because you see people who have been moved by God to do certain things. So tell us kind of what were some of the interesting things you came across on your journey. I'm just kind of curious, maybe the most moving story that you maybe encountered on your journey.
I think there are so many, hundreds. My wife was a faithful journaler on the walk across America. She wrote down the name of every person we met and every story that went along with that person. And so we had an incredible backlog of stories when we got home that I kept reading through. And there are just so many good ones. But one of my favorite ones to tell, we were just outside of Winslow, Arizona. And we had encountered a Navajo, a Native American, as we entered town, but he would barely acknowledge our presence. And we did our walking for the day, and we were on our way back to the vehicle to be driven back to camp that day. And we had volunteer drivers who came and shuttled us out in the morning, shuttled us back in the evening. And we saw this same Navajo man standing at the Welcome to Winslow monument. And there were two iron beams in the middle of this monument. We didn't know what they were, but we called out to this young man. When he turned around, he was weeping. He was crying, tears running down his cheeks. So we walked closer and we asked him if there was anything we could do, what the problem was. And he said, I was just remembering. Well, it turns out those two iron beams were two beams from the World Trade Centers in New York City. And he had been sent with the Navajo Job Corps to sift through the rubble and to look for bodies. And he said, I was just remembering what it was like to find someone. His name was Rick, same as mine. And we had a long conversation with Rick. And when we got ready to leave, I said, is there anything you need? He was homeless, living under an interstate bridge just a block or two away. I said, is there anything you need? He said, I'm awfully hungry. And I said, well, I know how to fix hunger. That's one thing I know how to fix. And I knew there was a Flying J truck stop right across the street that had a huge buffet. And I said, let's go across the street and I'll buy your lunch. So as we were walking over, Rick said to me, they're not going to let me eat inside. And I said, why not? And he said, because I'm homeless and because I'm an Indian. Now that was his words. And I said, well, let's just go in and see. And so I walked in and I told the lady behind the counter I wanted to buy Rick the buffet. And as I reached for my wallet, she reached under the counter for one of those white styrofoam to-go containers. And I said, no, ma'am, he wants to sit down at a table and eat just like everyone else. And I stayed long enough to make sure that Rick was seated with his food and he was eating and that there was no problem. And I walked away. Well, when we got home from the walk, I was sharing that story in a church service one day, and they were just getting ready to take communion. And one of the elders in the church said the blessing over the communion before it was given out. And she prayed this prayer, which to me just encapsulates what the whole walk was about. In response to that story, she said, Lord, we thank you that at your table there are no to-go containers. And I thought, that's it. That's what this walk was about. That's how it transformed our hearts and our eyes and our lives, to see that everyone's place at the table is just as wide as mine. And their name is written on the placard, just like my name is. And there's no one to this or to that to sit at the Lord's table. And God doesn't offer anybody to-go containers. He welcomes them all to sit at his table. And that's one of my very favorite stories to tell about the walk.
Wow, that's powerful. On the other side of that, what story maybe was the most challenging for you in terms of maybe troubling, or made you really have to stop and assess more deeply kind of where the status of America is?
Well, I think one of the things that troubled us the most was the homelessness. We purposefully routed ourselves through the inner cities of every state along the way that we could without walking too far out of the way. So we walked through Los Angeles, obviously, and through Flagstaff, New Mexico, or Arizona, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, Amarillo, Texas, Oklahoma City, Nashville, Knoxville, Memphis. And every major city we went to had such a horrible problem with homelessness. People living under bridges, people living in back alleys, people going through dumpsters trying to find their next meal. And so early on, one of the things we decided to do was we bought $5 McDonald's gift cards. And so every time we saw homeless that especially looked like they might be hungry or looking for a meal, we'd give them a McDonald's gift card. We'd spend some time with them, talk with them, pray with them, encourage them. We prayed with thousands and thousands of people across America, many of whom were homeless. And I think the thing that really touched us about that was that the best reception we got as we shared Jesus and prayed for people across America were the people in the inner city. They were the people who were homeless. They were the people that didn't look like us or smell like us or talk like us or behave like us. Many times it was the religious folks, the church folks, even many of the pastors that we stopped at. We'd stop at churches and say, is there anything we can pray for you about? Many of those pastors would just say, we don't want anything to do with this. No, we don't want anything. We don't need anything. We never asked for anything. We just wanted to pray for them. And so many times the least respect we got was from the people who should have been showing us at least some kindness And the most kindness we received were from the people who were the least like us, and the ones that we would think would shun us. Um, I was hugged more and smothered more by inner city people than I care to remember. My wife says, you got to stop letting those ladies do that to you. They would just wrap their arms around me and bury me in their bosom. And it was a little bit embarrassing, but it was so neat because they were just saying, we appreciate so much the fact that you love us and you care for us and you treat us with respect and dignity. And that means the world to us. And that also opened the door for us to share Jesus with them.
So you wrote a book about your journey, and it's called "And So We Walked: The Inspirational Story of a Couple's Walk Across America." I kind of got a chance to look at that book. You have a lot of chapters. So tell us about the framework for the book. And when someone picks it up, what will they discover in your book?
Well, it's a start to finish kind of book. It's in chronological order, except for the prologue. The prologue kind of jumps in the middle and tells a story about an accident that happened to me. But once the book starts, it goes right through from California all the way to Washington, D.C. It tells dozens and dozens of stories about the people we met. The story I just told you about Rick the Navajo's there, and many stories about the homeless people we met. And so it's stories. It's not so much a travelogue as it is a journal of how God worked through us and used us to affect and change people's minds about Jesus and what they thought about him. But I have to tell you, Keith, that the greatest thing that happened on the walk, when we started the walk, we thought the walk was about us changing and affecting people in America. What we found out very soon after we started was the fact that really the walk was about changing us. We had asked early on that the Lord would give us the eyes of Jesus as we walked. And we found out that when he does that, it changes everything. It changes your perspective. It changes any prejudices that you might have, your preconceived notions, because when you start to see people the way Jesus sees people, it's just unbelievable. And so the book is a story about how God allowed us to affect change in some people's lives, but mostly it's a journal about how God at every stop changed our life. When we first started, we thought it was about the steps. You got to get 20 miles in every day. That's a big chore. But we found out very quickly it wasn't about the steps. It was about the stops. It was about the stops that connected the steps. As we met people and as we interjected into their lives and as they sowed into our lives, we saw that it was about those times that we spent with people that was transformative, that made a difference, that really changed us in an unbelievable way.
You said something I want to kind of go deeper with. You said, as you started this journey, you prayed that you see things through the eyes of Jesus. And I noticed one story that you said that kind of stuck out in my mind was, much like Jesus on his journey, the people who had a hardest time accepting him and receiving him were the religious people. The people on the streets had a better reception for Jesus. As you look now through kind of his eyes, what revelation do you have about people and about America that you didn't have before this journey?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
And now a word from one of our sponsors, For Freedom Mobile. If you're using AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile, then you're being tracked. Mobile providers collect your location, communications, internet activity, even your financial transaction. They sell that data to anyone willing to pay for it and provide it to the government without a warrant. Switch to For Freedom Mobile, and you won't ever have to worry about big tech or Big Brother tracking you through your mobile phone again. For Freedom Mobile provides secure, unlimited talk, text, and high-speed data for just $29.99 a month, and it includes free internet roaming in over 200 countries. Sign up for the service by visiting forfreedommobile.com and using the promo code BridgeBuilders to get your first month for only $9.99. See forfreedommobile.com for details, just like the number 4, freedommobile.com.
Well, I think I say in the book that when you walk across America, you see America differently than you do when you drive across it. When you drive across America, you see it from the perspective of going 60, 70 miles an hour on an interstate. And you get a picture of America, but it's kind of an overview. It's kind of a satellite view. When you walk across America, you see things from a completely different perspective. So that's the first part of it. For example, when you drive by one of those white wooden crosses that's up beside the road, you see it for about 2 seconds. And you probably feel bad for a moment. You think, man, somebody died here. Somebody's life was taken here. But when you walk across America, you see that white cross for about a half a mile before you get there. And the closer it gets, the more detail you see. And you see the name that's written on that white cross. And you see that little teddy bear that's been strapped to that cross. And then you think about it for the next mile or two after you see it. And that's how everything is. Everything's exaggerated. Everything is huge. So when I talk about seeing people through Jesus' eyes, when you drive by people in your life, whether it's literally in a car or just living your life at a fast pace, you see them from one perspective. But when you see them with Jesus' eyes, you see them from a completely different perspective. You see them in a deeper way, in a more honest way, in a more transparent way. You see them not for who they are only, but for who they have the possibility of becoming. And you see not only where they're standing right now, but where God wants them to stand and where God wants them to move to. I think it's a time thing, but we have a tendency to see people as a snapshot where they are right now for this very moment. I think Jesus doesn't see people that way. Jesus doesn't see people as snapshots of what they are this second. He sees them as a novel that encompasses their entire life from beginning to end and all that they have the potential to become. And so I think that's part of what you see. I mean, there's the obvious things, to do with race and to do with economic status and to do with where people live and what they drive. Those are all surfacey things, but I think it goes much deeper than that, into seeing the potential that people have if God is a part of their life and all that he wants to do in and through them in this world. God left us here and leaves us here and allows us to be here because there's a purpose for our life. And I just think a whole lot of people miss out on that.
Yeah, that's very insightful. So I'm curious, as a pastor who's had an experience with it, how has it changed your preaching?
Well, I think mostly it's made me more empathetic, more understanding, less, I don't know that judgmental is the right word, but, preachers, we have a tendency to sometimes say, this is how you ought to do it. And I think my preaching after the walk became much more like, guys, we all struggle with this. What can we do to be victorious over this situation in our life, to have victory in this place where we just struggle so much? As a matter of fact, I tell people, if you're struggling with God's will, if you're struggling with committing to his will, this is a book that will help you, I think, but one of the things we found out, Keith, and I'll make this real short, but we made a decision, my wife and I, Jane and I made a decision when we first got married. We made a commitment to God that our answer would always be yes, no matter what the question was. Before the question was ever asked, our answer would always be yes. So it's kind of like with a friend. If a friend comes in and says, will you do me a favor? Our response usually is, well, what's the favor? Because we want to know what the favor is before we agree. And I think a lot of us treat God that way. God says, I have something I want you to do. And we say, well, what is it, before I answer? But we made a decision that the answer would always be yes, no matter what it was, no matter what he asked us to do, no matter where he asked us to go. And so we've been all over the world. We've been all over the United States. We've done crazy things like walk across America. And the reason is not because we're the best suited or the best financed or the best looking or the most athletic, but it's because our answer was yes before he asked. And I tell people all the time, we're probably not the first people that God asked to walk across America and tell people about Jesus and pray for our nation. But we may be one of the first that said yes. God has a way of since he knows what our answer is ahead of time, I think God has a way of allowing those of us whose answer is always yes to do some very special things for him. And he doesn't ever have to worry whether they're going to have to think about it or decide whether to do it or not when the answer is always yes.
That's a great perspective to have on that. It's hard, like you said, but
Yes.
But when you do that, God does open amazing doors for you.
Yes, he does.
So what are you excited about, Rick, in this season of your life?
Well, I'm so excited about, I never intended to write a book. When we walked across America, a book wasn't even in our thoughts. And every place we went, we would tell these stories, and people kept saying, you got to write a book, you got to write a book. And so I started working, then I'd put it away. I was sharing with you about school. I didn't think I could write. I went back to school, and then I was sure I couldn't write. The professor gave me my paperback the first time. It looked like a red paint can had exploded on it. He said, brother, you can't write. He said, if you don't learn to write, you're never going to get through this program. And so slowly I began to learn the art of writing, and I kept pulling the book out and working on it, pulling it out and working on it. And finally, we just decided we got to bite the bullet. We got to do this because we didn't want the stories to get lost. We wanted to leave that as a legacy for our kids and our friends and our former church members, and say, don't forget these stories, because these stories will transform your life. So we did that, and then we immediately saw something that we didn't expect. And that was, one, the success of the book, but two, people started emailing us and telling us stories about their life and about how the book affected them, and how it caused them to make a commitment to God to do something he'd been dealing with them for a long time. People that God had called to start churches said, if you can walk across America, I can start this church. Or if you can walk across America, I can do this other thing. And we said, man, this is making an impact. So what do we want to do? Well, the next thing we decided to do was, we said, children need to hear this story. And so we have written a children's book, had it illustrated. It comes out September 5th, and we have a dream. And the dream is, we're raising the money right now for 500 copies of this book, which we are going to put in pediatricians' offices and children's hospital all over the country, so that when children are there, they can read this book about Jesus and about committing their life to live for him and to walk for him wherever he calls them to walk. We think it's going to make a huge impact, and we think God's going to use it in a great way. So this thing of authorship has just kind of blown up, and I've got 2 or 3 more books in the works. Just completed the audio book, which was a real adventure. And I have a book coming out in this fall called Till the Whole World Knows. It is a guide for the introvert, extrovert, and Jesus freak about how to share Jesus. So I'm enjoying this time of my life. I'm teaching university, and I love that. But writing has become just a real joy in my life. And I'm glad God's allowing me to have this season.
That's amazing. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm always curious and ask my guests this question. What is the legacy you want to leave in the world?
I've said for many, many years that when I'm gone, if I have a tombstone and they write anything on it, I hope what they write is, he knew Jesus. Not he did great things, not he accomplished this or that, or he walked across America. I think the greatest thing that could ever be said about my life or anybody else's is he walked with Jesus. He knew Jesus. I always have loved that wonderful passage of scripture in Acts where they look at the disciples and they recognize that they are ignorant and unlearned men, but they also recognize that they had been with Jesus. And to me, that's the greatest legacy you can leave.
That's great. So, Rick, give our audience a chance again to know where they can find your book. And so we walked, the inspirational story of a couple who walk across America. And how can I connect with you on social media?
All right. The easiest thing to do is just go to our website. And it's very easy to remember. It's just our names, rickandjanemckinney.com. That's all there is, rickandjanemckinney.com. You can find out about the book there. There are links for that. There's also an About Us page. It has pictures of us all the way back to when we were babies. And I have a blog there, and we have information about the new children's book coming out. and lots of information about how you can schedule us to come to your church and talk about the walk. I mean, just anything you'd want is right there on the website, rickandjanemckinney.com.
Well, thanks, Rick, so much for taking this time, and thank you for saying yes to God's call for you to go and walk across America and share these amazing stories with the audience and with the world. Blessings on the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciated being here.
Thanks for listening to Becoming Bridge Builder. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at @bkeithhaney and on Getter and Twitter @RevHeadpin or on his website at alightbreaksthrough.org. Thanks again and tune in next time.
Do you know that most entrepreneurs hit a revenue ceiling and have no idea why? They're working harder, spending more money, running more ads, but revenue stays flat. My friend Dr. Noah St. John calls this the invisible break. He's giving our listeners a free revenue ceiling audit to help you see what's really holding you back. You'll get a free 30-day membership to NoahBot, giving you access to Dr. Noah's 30 years of experience to help you reach your next level. But hurry, because there's only 50 available this month. So if you're tired of being stuck at the same revenue level and want to finally break through, get your free revenue ceiling audit at drnoahvault.com in the affiliate link that'll be listed in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to Becoming Bridge Builder. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at @bkeithhaney and on Getter and Twitter @RevHeadpin. Thanks again and tune in next time.